I am a teenager living in Kansas, and I sneak out of my house on a fairly regular basis. One night at around 2 a.m., my friend Keaton and I were smoking weed in a junkyard. We would always hang out there, as it's a really big junkyard, and we had never been bothered by anybody there before, so we weren't worried about getting caught. We would usually smoke in the unlocked abandoned vans. We were in the back of a van, in the middle of our smoking session, when we heard tiny rocks hitting the front passenger window. We immediately freaked out, thinking it was the owner of the yard, so we put our stuff away and stayed quiet. After a minute of complete silence, we heard loud knocking on the windows. I almost shit my pants. The windows were spray painted, so we couldn't see who or how many people were knocking, so we burst out the back doors and ran as fast as we could through the yard. When I looked back, there were 4 men in President Clinton masks and dark clothing. They were all laughing devilishly, which temporarily distracted me from noticing what they held in their hands, each one of them wielding a knife. I nearly passed out from fright. They were catching up to us, so my friend and I cut down a row of cars and hid under the nearest car that we could both slide under. We were there for maybe 3 seconds before the men stopped a couple of cars away from the car we were under. We could hear them talking. They all sounded older, like maybe in their late 20s. One said, "Fuck, where are those stupid kids?" Another one said, "He is not going to be happy. The ceremony is later tonight." This sent shivers down my spine. Then one of them says, "They can't be far. I smell the little bitch's fear." It sounded like a line straight out of a horror movie. They started opening car doors looking for us. When they got to our car, I was so scared. My friend and I were both breathing heavy, but straining to remain silent. Time moved excruciatingly slow as they swung the car doors open. After not seeing us inside, they quickly moved to the next car. They tried 2 or 3 more cars, and then I assumed they decided to go look somewhere else for us, or gave up completely, because they ran off yelling and whooping into the night. We remained silent, hidden under the car for what felt like 2 hours, until I peeked my head out and saw no one around. We sprinted out of the yard and didn't stop until we reached my house. We never called the police or told anyone, because we would get in trouble for sneaking out and for smoking. We have never been back to that yard again, not even during the day, and we still don't know who those men were, or if they were part of a cult or something. A few questions I still ask myself are, how did they know we were in the van? Had they scoped us out on our previous visits? Or were we just in the wrong place at the wrong time? The one question I don't know if I want to know the answer to is, what was this ceremony that they wanted us for? A few months back, I was working at my local Dollar General. It wasn't the easiest job in the world, due to the fact that you constantly had to stock shelves and watch your register at the same time. Even though I don't consider myself a people person, I did enjoy some of my customers who came in every now and again. One evening, as the store was getting ready to close, Liz, a woman in her late 20s, came rushing in and apologizing for disturbing us as we were preparing to close down for the night. I waved and gave her a friendly smile and told her that it was no problem and to take her time. As she came to my register, I noticed that she had bought all of the Halloween decorations that were left over from the holiday. She had a few skeletons, a cauldron, and a ghost figurine. Somehow, we ended up talking for several minutes about the paranormal, and she informed me that she was on a TV show called The Dead Files because they did an episode in Delmont, Pennsylvania. That episode was titled Smothered. I, of course, took great interest in this because ever since I was a child, I was very intrigued with the paranormal and supernatural. Long story short, she ended up giving me her Facebook and told me to send her a friend request after work. When I had got home, I did my usual things such as eat, take a shower, and tend to all of my animals. I logged on to Facebook and discovered that she had already found me and sent me a request instead. Liz and I spoke on and off for about 6 months. At the time, she was in a terrible living situation that involved her roommate being a hoarder, and if you think that is bad, she was not only hoarding material objects, but animals as well. From what I was told, she had well over 20 cats, and most of them were sick. Liz lived secluded in her tiny bedroom, which she shared with her 2 cats. She was worried that her 2 cats would contract whatever the other ones had, and was desperately trying to move. My landlord and I got along pretty well, seeing how she worked with my grandmother decades ago at a florist shop. I made a quick phone call and spoke to the landlord and discovered that there was a unit available in our building, so I immediately told Liz. Fast forward to a month later, and Liz is already starting to move in across the hall from me. Everything is perfectly fine, and she is acting normal, like she always had. One evening she invited me over for a cup of tea, and I obliged, not wanting to be rude. When I walked into her apartment, the atmosphere felt much thicker and dense. There was barely any light in her living room, and from what I could see, she barely had any furniture. We made small talk and enjoyed a cup of tea together. Out of the blue, she asked me if I wanted to see her bedroom. I gave a slight nod and stood up and began to follow her as she took me back through her hallway. When I entered her room, I was completely flabbergasted, but attempted to keep my facial expressions neutral. There, right in front of her bed, was an altar. I don't mean a satanic altar, because it had angels sitting on it, but there were other things, such as crystals and an authentic cauldron. She laughed a little, and then admitted she was a witch. I chuckled with her, and not being very judgmental, I accepted what she told me, thinking it was actually rather cool. I then told her I needed to head to bed for the night because I had to work the next morning. The next day is when I began to notice her strange behavior. I had gone on break, and while I was working, 99% of the time I had my phone on me. I had pulled my phone out to give my boyfriend a call, as I usually did, and I noticed I had several messages from her asking when I was getting home and if I would come by her place. I thought this was slightly odd, but I didn't look too much into it and replied to her that I would be home within the next few hours. 2 minutes after I would walk into the door and set my things down, she would be texting and calling me. This has gone on for several months. I think I truly began to realize the severity of this problem when I received a phone call one afternoon asking if I would be able to go over to her apartment and open a bottle of medicine because she had the flu and was too weak to do it herself. As I stated, Liz is almost 30 years old. I am now 22, and when I am sick, I have no problem opening a bottle of medicine. I began to feel uneasy about this situation more and more, to the point where I had to have a talk with my boyfriend about her. The very next day, I was enjoying my couple of days off by playing Borderlands 2 with my man. Anytime my TV or radio would be on, I would immediately get a text message from Liz because she knew I was home. She was still constantly asking me over, and most times I would tell her no because I was busy. That is when she began to beg. I would get text messages at different hours of the night because she knew my boyfriend worked the graveyard shift and wouldn't be home until 5:30 in the morning, and I usually stayed awake waiting on him so we would be on the same schedule. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I received a text message asking if I could please walk over to her place and help her clean her litter boxes. I was completely baffled, and asked her why she was not able to do it herself. I got no response back. Later on in the week, there was a knock on my door, and of course it was Liz. She asked me if she was able to come in. I agreed, but told her that I would be leaving shortly to run errands. She seemed to completely ignore my statement, and began talking about something even more frightening than witchcraft. Liz began telling me that one of the main reasons she wanted to leave her old home was not because of her roommate being a hoarder, but because she was not able to openly express her beliefs. I asked her to elaborate, and I truly wish I wouldn't have. She began to tell me that all kinds of mythological creatures such as fairies, elves, and dragons still exist to this day, and she believes she is part fairy. She claims that she is currently making tiny wooden doors and windows to glue to her walls because that is the entry point for the fairies and tiny mythological creatures to enter her room. I did my best to keep my composure, but inside I was screaming for her to get away from me. Her story just continued to get even crazier when she claimed that she could see and speak to her spirit guide. Now, I am not exactly an expert when it comes to all things paranormal, but seeing as how I have a Hindu friend who is actually very spiritual and knows many things when it comes to things like this, I do know that it takes many, many years for one to be able to see or even speak to their spiritual guide, if one even believes in that. It was at this point I knew I had a problem. Not only did my neighbor seem like she was mentally unstable in many different aspects, but she was extremely clingy to me. After this occurred, and she had invited me over several times to chant with her and make spells in her cauldron, I slowly began to distance myself from her. Once she began to realize that I was no longer responding to her text messages or phone calls, or even visiting her, she began to get angry. As crazy as this may sound to all of you, the entire third floor of the apartment building, where our units are, was nothing but a dark and ominous atmosphere. I have even noticed that no matter how many times maintenance would change the light bulb, it would constantly burn out and leave the entire third floor in a blanket of darkness. After a couple of months of not speaking to Liz, my Hindu friend came to visit. As I mentioned, she is very spiritual and is very knowledgeable when it comes to the occult. The moment she stepped into my unit, she stood and took a minute to look around. She immediately told me that there was a dark presence lingering between my unit and Liz's. She then pulled out a stick of white sage and began to burn it as she recited all of her prayers in Hindi. Afterwards, she asked me if anybody I knew was messing around with a Ouija board. I told her that Liz had a few of them, and from what I was told, she enjoyed using them on and off to speak with the non-living. This made my friend very uneasy, and she quickly began searching her backpack for the holy water in which she brought for us, as well as her totems she uses to protect her and her people against evil entities. After the cleansing of my apartment, the atmosphere is definitely lighter. Even though Liz still lives across the hall from me, I rarely see her, and when I do, she seems to try her best to ignore me. There will be different times when I will leave my apartment, either to get the mail or to run errands with my man, and sometimes I can hear her talking to herself about very odd things. Not only will she speak to herself, but she also answers herself. There's been many times where I could hear her using a Ouija board, because I could hear her asking it several questions. Believing in witchcraft is one thing, but babbling with Ouija boards is never good. There's so much to this story that I know I'm leaving out many occurrences. However, if I would continue, it would take forever. All I know is that Liz is messing and talking around with things that she thinks are good, but in reality they don't seem to be. Maybe she has some type of mental disorder that she's unaware of. I did my fair research on schizophrenia, and she exhibits most of the strong signals. Or maybe something is truly happening. I guess I will never know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you check the description for information on how to submit your stories. I do have to say, I really enjoyed the way the second story danced on the paranormal side but didn't quite go over the line. It actually leads perfectly into the Ouija board stories that I'm featuring on Urmaker. So if you would like to continue this journey into the paranormal, make sure you check the description for a link to my newest video on Urmaker. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.